The morning sun fell softly over the Los Angeles courthouse. A crowd had already gathered outside long before the hearing was set to begin. Reporters lined the steps, camera lights flashing, microphones in hand, hoping to catch even a glimpse of the man everyone was waiting for, Elon Musk. The air was full of excitement and speculation. Some people came to support him, others just to see what kind of drama would unfold that day. Everyone knew that when Elon Musk was involved, something unexpected always happened. Inside the courtroom, things were calmer but tense. Lawyers whispered to one another, flipping through their papers. Court officers moved around, setting up microphones and preparing for a long day. At the front sat the judge, a tall man with sharp features and a reputation for being tough on anyone who thought they were above the law. He had seen all kinds of people in his courtroom, celebrities, politicians, and powerful business figures. But Elon Musk, the man behind Tesla and SpaceX, was a different kind of presence altogether. When Elon finally walked in, all eyes turned toward him. He wasn't dressed in a fancy suit like most people expected. Instead, he wore a simple dark jacket and a calm expression. He greeted his lawyer quietly and took his seat, not looking around or reacting to the flashes of cameras that flickered through the room. There was something oddly peaceful about him, as if he had already made peace with whatever was going to happen next. The case itself was complicated, but made simple in the headlines. One of Elon's companies was being accused of violating certain regulatory rules related to a new project. Some people said he had pushed too far too fast, ignoring government standards in his race to innovate. Others believed it was all politics, that people in power didn't like how quickly he was changing industries that had been the same for decades. But no matter which side people were on, everyone agreed this case was going to be a spectacle. The judge cleared his throat and looked straight at Elon. "Mr. Musk," he said with a hint of sarcasm, "I assume you understand why you're here?" Elon nodded slightly. "Yes, Your Honor," he said in a calm tone. "I believe it's about a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," the judge repeated, raising an eyebrow. "That's one way to describe it. The documents suggest a little more than that, don't they?" The courtroom chuckled softly. Even some of the reporters hiding their smiles found the moment amusing. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly not intimidated by Elon's fame or success. "I've read a lot about you, Mr. Musk," he said. "You seem to think rules are optional when you have enough money or ideas." Elon didn't reply immediately. He simply met the judge's gaze, calm but thoughtful. "I think progress sometimes moves faster than paperwork," he finally said. His words were careful, not defensive, but honest. That only seemed to encourage the judge's sarcasm. "Well, let's hope your paperwork catches up before your rockets do," he said dryly. The crowd laughed again, and the sound echoed through the courtroom. Elon's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to say something, but Elon raised his hand slightly, signaling him to stay quiet. Outside the courtroom, the news was spreading fast. Headlines were already appearing online. Judge mocks Elon Musk in courtroom showdown. Clips of the exchange were being shared within minutes. Some viewers found it entertaining, the idea of a powerful man being humbled by the justice system. Others thought the judge was going too far, making the hearing more about personality than law. But Elon didn't seem rattled. As the lawyers presented their opening statements, he sat still, listening closely. His hands were folded, his face calm, his attention sharp. It was the kind of silence that made people wonder what was going on in his mind. He wasn't the kind of person who liked losing control of a situation, but he also wasn't one to react emotionally. He waited, observed, calculated. After the initial statements, the judge began questioning Elon directly. "Mr. Musk," he said, "you've made quite a career out of breaking barriers and then sometimes breaking rules. Do you think the law doesn't apply to you?" Elon gave a small smile. "No, Your Honor," he said. "I think the law should protect progress, not punish it." The judge tilted his head, pretending to think about that answer. "So you're saying it's the law's fault?" "I'm saying sometimes the world changes faster than the system expects," Elon replied, still calm. "We're trying to create things that didn't exist before, and sometimes that confuses people." There was something in the way he said it, not arrogance, but conviction, a quiet kind of belief that didn't need to shout. The judge, however, wasn't ready to be impressed. "That's a nice speech," he said coldly. "But this isn't a TED Talk, it's a courtroom. You're not here to inspire us. You're here to explain why your company ignored regulations. The room went silent again. Elon leaned forward slightly, resting his hands on the table. I'm here to explain the truth, he said. And I think when we get to the facts, it will be clear there was no violation. The judge gave a faint smirk as if to say, we'll see about that. Hours passed as lawyers from both sides presented their arguments. Charts, reports, and documents filled the projector screen. Elon's team tried to clarify how the project followed all safety standards, but the opposing counsel argued that certain steps were skipped or rushed. At one point, the judge interrupted to make another sarcastic comment about how billionaires think time moves differently for them. Some people laughed again, but others began to notice something. Elon wasn't fighting back, not even once. He wasn't flustered, wasn't angry. He just kept listening carefully, taking notes, occasionally whispering to his lawyer. During the short recess, reporters ran outside to share updates. The judge is tearing into Musk, one said on live television. He's not giving him any special treatment, and Musk looks like he's just sitting there taking it. The crowd outside seemed divided, some cheering, some shaking their heads. Social media was exploding with opinions, but what nobody could see was what was happening inside Elon's mind. He was studying everything, not just the arguments, but the tone, the rhythm, the details people missed. To him, every comment, every question, every small piece of evidence was part of a larger puzzle. He wasn't reacting emotionally because he knew emotion was the enemy of logic. He had been underestimated before as by engineers, investors, governments, and in every time. He had used their doubts as fuel. When the court resumed, Elon's lawyer began presenting the defense. But halfway through, Elon leaned over and whispered something. The lawyer hesitated, surprised. Then Elon stood up slightly and addressed the judge. Your Honor, he said, with your permission, I'd like to respond personally to some of these claims. The courtroom fell silent again. Even the judge raised his eyebrows. You want to speak for yourself? He asked, sounding half amused, half doubtful. Yes, Elon said. Just for a few minutes, the judge gave a short laugh. Well, I suppose this is your show, Mr. Musk. Go ahead. Let's see what you've got. His tone was mocking, but Elon didn't react. He walked up to the stand slowly, his steps quiet, his face unreadable. He adjusted the microphone and took a moment before speaking. I didn't come here to debate, he said softly. I came to clarify. The judge crossed his arms. By all means. Elon began to speak, not like a lawyer, but like someone explaining a design to his engineers. He didn't use complicated legal terms. He spoke simply, clearly, step by step, showing how his company's decisions were based on safety tests, not shortcuts. He explained the science, the process, and the timeline in a way that even people with no technical background could follow. He pointed out small inconsistencies in the opposing team's claims, not aggressively, but with precision. The room grew quieter with every word. Even the reporters stopped typing for a moment. There was something compelling about how he spoke. Direct, logical, but human. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply explaining how things worked, and in doing so, revealing how misunderstood the case really was. The judge tried to interrupt once or twice, but each time Elon paused, listened carefully, and then responded with facts that addressed the question perfectly. He didn't argue. He explained. He didn't attack. He clarified. Slowly, the mocking tone from earlier began to fade. The judge, who had started the day with sarcasm and skepticism, now leaned forward, his expression more focused than dismissive. By the time Elon finished, the courtroom felt different. The tension was still there, but it had shifted. People weren't laughing anymore. They were thinking. When Elon returned to his seat, the judge cleared his throat but didn't say much. All right, Mr. Musk, he said finally. We'll continue tomorrow. His voice sounded neutral now. No sarcasm, no mockery. Just measured words. Elon nodded respectfully and sat back down, his calm expression unchanged. As he walked out of the courtroom later that afternoon, the reporters shouted questions from every direction, but he didn't answer any. He just smiled politely and stepped into his car. Inside, his lawyer turned to him and said, I think you made an impression today. Elon looked out the window as the car pulled away. I wasn't trying to make an impression, he said. I was trying to make sense. That night the internet buzzed again, but this time the tone was different. Clips of the hearing were spreading online, but people weren't laughing anymore. They were commenting on how calm, logical, and clear Elon's explanations were. So, the next morning the courthouse looked even busier than before. Reporters stood shoulder to shoulder, waiting for Elon Musk to arrive. People carried signs, some cheering for him, others demanding accountability. It had become more than just a court case now. It was turning into a public event. Everyone wanted to see what would happen after his calm but powerful performance the day before. Inside, the atmosphere was serious. The judge sat at his bench flipping through his notes. His face looked a little different from yesterday, still stern but not as sharp. He had watched the replay of Elon's statements the night before, and even though he would never admit it, something about the man's composure had stuck with him. He had expected arrogance, but what he saw was confidence without ego. It wasn't what he had imagined. Elon entered quietly, nodding politely at the staff as he walked to his seat. He looked the same as yesterday, focused and calm. The only thing different was the energy in the room. People weren't whispering about his downfall anymore. They were curious. They wanted to hear more from him. When the judge began the session, his voice was steady. "Mr. Musk," he said, "yesterday you gave quite a statement. Today we'll continue with the evidence. I expect the same respect for procedure." "Of course, Your Honor," Elon said. The judge gave a short nod, almost like a small sign of respect, then turned to the opposing counsel. "You may proceed." The opposing lawyer stood, clearly trying to regain control of the room. He started showing documents, photos, and reports meant to prove that Elon's company had broken the rules. His tone was sharp, his words confident. For a while, it seemed like he had the upper hand again. He pointed out gaps in the company's reports and accused them of hiding information. Elon listened closely, writing notes quietly. He didn't interrupt or react. Every now and then his lawyer leaned over to whisper something, but Elon just shook his head softly, signaling him to wait. He wanted to hear everything first, every word, every accusation, every point. After nearly an hour, the lawyer finished. The judge looked toward Elon's side. "Mr. Musk, do you wish to respond?" Elon stood up slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to clarify some of those points." The judge gestured for him to continue. Elon walked toward the stand again, holding a single sheet of paper. "There's a lot of confusion about what actually happened," he began. "So let me explain this as simply as I can." He looked around the courtroom, not to impress anyone, but to make sure everyone understood. This project wasn't rushed. It was tested over and over again. The data they're showing today is correct, but incomplete. They're not showing the follow-up tests, the final reports, or the internal reviews we did right after. He placed the sheet of paper on the table for the judge to see. "Here," he said softly. "This is the internal report that was submitted a few weeks later, confirming that all concerns were addressed. It's dated, signed, and verified." The courtroom grew quiet again. The opposing lawyer frowned, flipping through his own documents, realizing he didn't have that file. The judge leaned forward, studying the paper. It was authentic. Why wasn't this included in the original case files? The judge asked. Elon smiled faintly. "Because no one asked for it," he said. "And sometimes people stop looking once they think they've already found what they want." That line hit the room like a quiet truth. It wasn't said in anger, but in a way that made people stop and think. The judge sat back, silent for a moment, before gesturing for Elon to continue. Elon went on to explain how regulations had changed mid-project, creating confusion between two sets of standards. His company had followed the new version, but the complaint was based on the old one. He used simple examples, avoiding technical language, making sure even the people in the back could follow. The more he spoke, the more the tone of the courtroom shifted again. He wasn't just defending himself. He was teaching everyone how things actually worked behind the scenes. At one point, the judge asked, "Are you saying this was just a misunderstanding of the law?" Elon nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, a misunderstanding and a communication gap. We weren't trying to break rules. We were trying to build something new. And sometimes the rules don't update as fast as innovation does." The judge didn't respond immediately. He just studied him quietly. It was clear that once again, Elon had turned a tense situation into something unexpectedly thoughtful. During a short break, people in the hallway started talking differently. "He's not what I thought he'd be," one reporter said to another. "He's actually making sense." A few others nodded, agreeing that the case didn't seem as one-sided anymore. When the session resumed, the opposing lawyer tried to regain momentum. "Mr. Musk," he said firmly, "even if your explanation is correct, don't you agree that rules exist to prevent risk? And that sometimes innovation should wait for permission?" Elon looked at him and paused before answering. "I agree that safety is important," he said slowly. "But permission isn't progress. If we waited for permission to innovate, we'd still be using candles instead of electricity." The crowd let out a soft murmur. Even the judge's lips twitched slightly, as if he was holding back a smile. Elon continued, "The point isn't to ignore the law, it's to help it grow with the world. We need laws that understand progress, not punish it." For a moment, the courtroom was completely still. It wasn't a speech meant to impress. It was just the truth, spoken plainly. By late afternoon, the judge called for another recess. As Elon left the courtroom, reporters crowded around him again, but this time the questions were different. They weren't mocking. They were curious. "Do you think you're winning?" one asked. Elon simply replied, "It's not about winning. It's about understanding." His lawyer smiled at that. "You're changing the mood in there," he said as they got into the car. Even the judge seems to be listening now. Elon didn't respond right away. He looked out the window, deep in thought. "He's a smart man," he finally said. "He just needs to see the bigger picture." That night, television channels replayed the day's highlights. Clips of Elon's calm explanations spread quickly online. People who hadn't been following the case began tuning in. Hashtags trended worldwide. What started as a courtroom drama was turning into a debate about innovation, regulation, and progress. Meanwhile, in his home office, Elon sat alone reviewing documents. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends, colleagues, and even other CEOs offering support. He appreciated it, but he didn't reply to most of them. He wasn't focused on image or sympathy. He cared only about making sure every piece of evidence was ready for the next day. His mind worked like an engine that never stopped, always thinking, always refining. The next morning, the crowd outside was even larger. People from all backgrounds had come to see what would happen next. Inside, the courtroom felt different again. The judge greeted everyone politely, without the sarcastic tone from before. He even nodded toward Elon when he entered. It was a small gesture, but people noticed. As the session began, Elon was asked about the timeline of his project. The opposing side tried to prove that his team had rushed things to beat a competitor. Elon calmly denied it, explaining the step-by-step process and showing time-stamped evidence of every test and review. His words were simple, but his logic was airtight. At one point, the judge interrupted. "Mr. Musk, it sounds like you know this project inside out." Elon smiled lightly. "I should, Your Honor. I helped to design it." The courtroom chuckled softly. Even the judge couldn't hide a grin. "Fair point," he said. As the hours passed, the balance of the case started to shift. The more Elon explained, the clearer it became that many of the accusations came from misunderstandings and half-truths. By the end of the session, the judge leaned back and said, "I'll need to review this new information before we proceed further." It was a simple statement, but everyone in the room understood what it meant. The tide was turning. When Elon walked out of the courthouse that day, the crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters shouted questions again, but this time their tone was respectful. Some even clapped. It was as if the entire city had gone from seeing him as a reckless billionaire to someone who stood for reason and courage. Later that evening, the judge sat alone in his office, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. He thought about the way he had mocked Elon on the first day. He wasn't proud of that. He had expected arrogance, maybe even defiance. But instead, he found someone who used logic, patience, and humility. It wasn't what he was used to seeing in courtrooms. He leaned back in his chair, sighing quietly. "Maybe I was wrong," he murmured to himself. Meanwhile, Elon sat on his balcony that night, watching the city lights below. The case wasn't over yet, but he could feel a shift. The hard part wasn't proving the fact, it was breaking through assumptions. He knew the next session would be crucial. It would decide whether the truth he'd been trying to show would finally be recognized. As he sat there, a faint smile crossed his face. "People fear what they don't understand," he whispered to himself. "But once they understand it, everything changes. The night was calm. The noise of the world faded into the distance. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more pressure, more eyes watching every move he made. But Elon wasn't worried. He had faced harder challenges before. Rockets that failed, cars that crashed, projects that almost went bankrupt. Well, the next day arrived with a heavy sky and a soft drizzle that made the courthouse steps shine under the early light. The air carried a quiet tension. Reporters were already in place, umbrellas in hand, waiting for Elon Musk to arrive. The case had now become the top story across every major news outlet. People weren't just talking about a legal battle anymore. They were talking about Elon's composure, his clarity, and the way he handled pressure. When his car pulled up, the crowd surged forward, cameras flashing. Elon stepped out calmly, his jacket slightly damp from the rain. He greeted a few reporters politely but didn't stop for questions. His expression was thoughtful, not tense. It was clear that he was ready, not to fight but to prove his point once and for all. Inside, the courtroom was packed tighter than ever. Every seat was taken, and even the hallway outside was crowded with people trying to listen in. The judge entered a few minutes later, carrying a stack of papers. His face looked tired but thoughtful. He glanced toward Elon as he sat down, then adjusted his glasses. "Let's continue," he said in a quiet but firm tone. As the proceedings began, the opposing lawyer presented new evidence, or at least tried to. He brought up technical reports and old interviews, attempting to paint a picture of recklessness. But this time the tone in the room was different. People weren't automatically believing what they heard. They were listening more carefully, waiting to see what Elon would say in response. Elon sat still, taking notes as he had done every day before. When the lawyer finished, he looked up and said, "Your Honor, may I address this myself again?" The judge hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "You may." Elon stood and walked to the center of the room. The soft hum of the rain outside filled the silence as he began to speak. "What you've just heard," he said slowly, "is a list of things taken out of context. I'd like to explain what actually happened and why it matters." He didn't sound defensive. He sounded honest. He talked about the challenges his team faced, the changes in regulations, and how communication gaps between departments created confusion. He took responsibility for the mistakes that were made, but also made it clear that none of them were intentional or harmful. Then he did something unexpected. He turned slightly toward the judge and said, "Your Honor, I know I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent my life trying to understand systems, not just machines or rockets, but people and rules. Systems are meant to help progress, not hold it hostage. When a system fails to adapt, everyone loses." The judge didn't interrupt this time. He listened. The courtroom was completely silent except for Elon's voice and the sound of rain tapping the windows. Elon continued, "We followed every process that existed at the time. What we didn't expect was for the rules to change halfway through. We adjusted as best we could, but the misunderstanding grew. Instead of talking, people filed complaints. Instead of asking questions, they assumed wrongdoing. That's how we ended up here." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle. Then he added softly, "I'm not here to prove that I'm smarter or more powerful than anyone. I'm here because I believe progress only works when it's built on truth. And the truth is simple. We didn't break the law. We followed it even when it kept changing." There was something in his tone that reached people beyond logic. It felt genuine, like someone who wasn't trying to win but simply wanted to be understood. The judge looked at him quietly for a few seconds, then asked, "Do you have anything else to add, Mr. Musk?" Elon nodded. "Yes, I think people often mistake innovation for arrogance. But the goal has never been to break things. It's to build a better way. If I had wanted to ignore rules, I wouldn't be standing here. I'd have walked away. But I came here because I respect this process, even when it's unfairly aimed at me." The judge leaned back, his face unreadable. The opposing lawyer tried to object, saying that Elon was turning the courtroom into a philosophy session, but the judge raised his hand. "Let him finish," he said calmly. Elon looked at the lawyer briefly, then back at the judge. "I know I'm being judged for my actions, not my words. So all I ask is that you look at the facts, not the opinions, not the headlines, just the facts." He then walked back to his seat and sat down, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the silent room. For a moment, nobody moved. The judge cleared his throat, clearly trying to maintain control of the proceedings. But the shift in tone was undeniable. Even the reporters looked at one another, unsure what to write. When the break was called, people poured into the hallways, whispering. "Did you hear that?" Someone said. "He's not even angry. He's just real." Another person added, "It's like he's teaching a class in logic." The opposing lawyer looked frustrated. He had expected Elon to crumble under pressure. But instead, Elon's calm explanations kept disarming every attack. The judge had gone from skeptical to contemplative, and that change was visible to everyone watching. During the lunch recess, Elon sat quietly in a small conference room with his legal team. His lawyer looked at him with a mix of admiration and concern. "You're handling this like no one I've ever seen," he said. "But you know, judges don't like being challenged, even politely." Elon smiled faintly. "I'm not challenging him," he said. "I'm just explaining how things really work. People make better decisions when they understand." Outside, the media was buzzing again. News channels replayed clips of his speech over and over, calling it the turning point of the trial. Analysts debated whether his words were strategic or sincere. But the public didn't seem to care about strategy. They cared about the way he spoke, calm, logical, and human. When the hearing resumed, the judge began asking Elon direct questions. His tone was still firm but lacked the earlier mockery. "Mr. Musk," he said, "you keep talking about progress and innovation. But laws exist for a reason, to protect people. Don't you think pushing too fast can be dangerous?" Elon nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, Your Honor. Anything can be dangerous if done without care. But I don't think the answer is to slow down progress. The answer is to build better systems that keep up with it. We shouldn't punish people for moving forward responsibly." The judge considered that, tapping his pen on the desk. "That's easier said than done," he replied. "I know," Elon said softly. "But everything worth doing usually is." There was a faint smile on the judge's face, the kind that showed reluctant respect. The rest of the afternoon continued with back-and-forth discussions, but the energy in the room was entirely different. Each time Elon spoke, even briefly, the tone of the room changed. The mocking laughter that had once echoed through the courtroom was gone. Now there was silence, the kind that comes when people are truly listening. By late afternoon, the judge called for one final statement before ending the day. The opposing lawyer summarized his side, insisting that Elon's company had acted carelessly. Then the judge turned to Elon. "Would you like to make a closing remark for today, Mr. Musk?" Elon stood slowly. "Just one," he said. "Every time we try to build something new, people doubt it. When we started making electric cars, they said it would never work. When we launched rockets, they said we'd fail. When we built tunnels to ease traffic, they said it was impossible. But here's the truth. Progress always looks like defiance at first. I don't expect everyone to understand right away, but someday the same people who question us will benefit from what we built." He looked toward the judge and added gently, "I just hope that day comes sooner, not later." The judge nodded slowly, clearly moved by the sincerity in his tone. "Court adjourned," he said, his voice quieter than before. As Elon walked out, the crowd outside exploded with applause. Reporters shouted questions, but again he didn't stop. He just waved briefly and got into his car. Inside, his lawyer looked at him and said, "You know, I think you've changed his mind." Elon shook his head. "I didn't change it. I just gave him something real to think about." That night, the judge stayed late in his office. The rain had stopped, but the sound of thunder echoed faintly in the distance. He sat at his desk, looking through the files again. The evidence that once seemed simple now looked different in the light of what he had heard. Elon's explanations had filled in gaps he hadn't noticed before. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "Maybe I was too quick to judge him," he muttered to himself. The irony of his own words made him smile slightly. He picked up one of Elon's internal reports and studied it again, this time not as a critic but as someone genuinely trying to understand. Meanwhile, Elon sat at home, quietly reflecting on the day. The world outside was still buzzing with opinions, but inside he felt a strange calm. He knew there was still one more session left, the one that would decide everything. But he also knew something deeper had already changed. The judge no longer saw him as an arrogant billionaire. He saw him as a man who stood by his beliefs. Elon closed his laptop and walked to the window. The clouds were breaking, revealing a faint trace of moonlight. He watched it for a long time, his mind quiet but alert. Tomorrow would be important, not because it would clear his name, but because it might finally prove what he'd always believed. That truth, when spoken calmly and clearly, had a power stronger than any courtroom argument. He smiled slightly, almost to himself. "Let's see what happens next," he whispered, and turned off the lights. The courtroom was silent when Elon stood again. His calm face showed no trace of frustration or ego, only focus. He adjusted the microphone slightly and began to speak, his tone steady and clear. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I understand that what I'm about to explain might sound unusual, but I promise it will make sense by the end." The judge leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes sharp with curiosity. The audience was watching closely, expecting Elon to make another daring argument. Some still thought he was overconfident. Others sensed something bigger coming. His legal team sat quietly, hands folded, trusting him completely now. Elon picked up a stack of papers that had been sitting on the table since the beginning of the trial. "This report," he began, "was written months ago before this case even started. It explains how the regulation that was cited against us was interpreted incorrectly." His words caught everyone's attention. The opposing lawyer raised an eyebrow, whispering something to his assistant. Elon continued, "If you look closely, you'll see that the law being used against my company was meant to protect innovation, not stop it." He spoke with such quiet confidence that the entire courtroom leaned forward. His tone wasn't arrogant, it was precise. Every sentence sounded like it had been measured before leaving his lips. He placed one of the papers in front of the judge, pointing to a highlighted section. "The clause here," he explained, "is often misunderstood. It doesn't prohibit development under certain conditions. It actually encourages it, as long as transparency and safety checks are in place. And we've done both." The judge frowned slightly, reading the lines with interest. The opposing lawyer quickly flipped through his own copy of the regulation, looking for the same section. Elon waited patiently. The air was thick with tension, but his composure never broke. When the judge finally looked up, Elon continued, "This misunderstanding happened because the language of the law is technical. But if you follow the data, you can see that our interpretation was accurate all along." He then presented graphs, test results, and independent audits that proved his point. Every document was organized and easy to understand. It was clear he had spent hours preparing, not as a businessman trying to save face, but as someone who genuinely cared about truth. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of paper turning. Each time Elon moved to a new point, he backed it up with evidence. He didn't speak to impress anyone. He spoke to make sense. Slowly, the judge's skeptical expression began to fade. The sarcasm that had colored his tone earlier was gone. He was now listening carefully, occasionally nodding as Elon spoke. At one point, Elon paused and took a sip of water. He looked at the judge and said, "Your Honor, I respect the legal system deeply, but sometimes innovation moves faster than interpretation. When that happens, communication becomes essential. We never tried to bypass the law. We just believed we were following it in the spirit it was written." The words hit differently. The judge, who had once teased Elon for thinking he was above the rules, now seemed to see something else. A man who believed in progress but also respected the boundaries that protected society. The people in the audience could feel it too. Some even whispered quietly, surprised by how sincere he sounded. The opposing lawyer stood up, trying to break the flow. "Mr. Musk," he said, "even if your interpretation holds, doesn't the regulation still limit your project under Section 4? Elon looked at him with calm eyes and replied, "It does, but only if the project poses measurable risk. We provided reports showing no risk. They were reviewed by independent experts, but that part of the documentation wasn't submitted in the initial filing due to a clerical delay." He turned to the clerk and handed over another folder. "Here are the missing reports, dated and signed before the issue began. You can verify the authenticity." The lawyer froze. He hadn't expected that. The judge glanced at the documents, flipping through the pages. There it was, the missing piece that changed everything. The silence stretched long. The judge slowly placed the papers down, looked up and said, "So you're saying the law wasn't violated because the required safety validation already existed, just wasn't attached?" Elon nodded. "Exactly. The system we used was fully compliant. It was never about breaking rules. It was about advancing technology responsibly. A faint murmur went through the courtroom. People were impressed. Even those who had come expecting a dramatic downfall now looked at him with respect. The judge's tone softened slightly as he asked, "And why didn't you explain this earlier?" Elon gave a small smile. "I thought the evidence would speak for itself. But I realize not everyone reads the fine print." Laughter rippled gently through the room, not mocking but warm. Even the judge cracked a faint smile. The tension that had filled the air earlier was gone, replaced by curiosity and admiration. Elon wasn't just defending himself anymore, he was teaching, showing how clarity and truth could turn an entire situation around. He continued to walk through the evidence, step by step, explaining every part of the case in plain words. He didn't rush, didn't boast, and never raised his voice. He spoke like a man who had nothing to prove, only something to clarify. By the time he finished, even the people who had doubted him couldn't find fault in his reasoning. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Musk, this is quite a presentation. You've handled this more effectively than most lawyers I've seen." Elon nodded politely. "Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to make sure the truth was clear." Then came a pause. The judge looked thoughtful, almost lost in reflection. The same man who had mocked Elon earlier was now visibly impressed. He looked down at the papers again, his fingers tapping lightly on the desk. The courtroom waited silent. After a moment, the judge said, "When this case started, I thought you were trying to bend the law to fit your goals. But it seems the law itself was misunderstood. I'll need time to review everything, but I must say, your explanation was unexpectedly precise." Those words sent a quiet wave through the room. Elon simply nodded, offering a polite smile. He didn't celebrate or show pride. He gathered his notes, thanked the court, and sat down. The people watching knew something had changed. The tone of the entire case had shifted. Outside, reporters were already waiting. The whispers began spreading. How Elon Musk had turned the courtroom around with nothing more than logic, calmness, and preparation. Inside, the judge sat in silence for a few moments after Elon returned to his seat, rereading parts of the document again and again. During the recess, a few lawyers approached Elon quietly to shake his hand. "You handled that beautifully," one of them said. Elon smiled lightly. "Thank you. I just believe that facts matter." When the court resumed, the opposing lawyer tried one last time to challenge the argument, but the judge interrupted politely. "I think we've heard enough for today," he said. His tone was no longer stern or sarcastic. It was calm and measured, carrying a hint of respect. The rest of the session passed quickly. The judge announced that he would take time to review the evidence before making a final decision. As everyone began to leave, Elon gathered his things slowly, still humble, greeting a few people who approached to compliment him. Outside the courtroom, flashes from cameras filled the air. Reporters surrounded him, asking how he managed to stay calm under pressure. Elon smiled faintly. "It's simple," he said. "When you know the truth, there's no reason to be nervous. You just explain it until everyone sees it too." His words spread quickly through media headlines that evening. Clips of the hearing began circulating online. Short moments showing the judge's changing expression, the calm tone in Elon's voice, the shift from mockery to silence. People commented, calling it a masterclass in composure, but Elon didn't seem interested in attention. Later that night, as his team celebrated quietly, he sat by himself for a while thinking. He wasn't proud or triumphant, just thoughtful. "Sometimes," he said quietly to one of his assistants, "people misunderstand not because they want to, but because things move faster than they can see. It's our job to explain better." Those around him nodded. They had seen how patience, clarity, and respect could win even the toughest moments. Elon had walked into the courtroom being mocked, and walked out being respected, not because of power or influence, but because of truth and understanding. The next day, newspapers carried headlines like, "Judge speechless after Musk's legal genius turns case around." Analysts on talk shows discussed how he had used logic rather than emotion to shift the case completely. The public admired how he handled criticism with grace and stayed calm under pressure. Inside the courthouse, the judge reviewed the documents one more time in his office. He looked at the report Elon had handed over and sighed quietly. "Genius," he whispered to himself, "comes in many forms. But this kind and this patience on it's rare. For Elon, the experience was never about proving superiority. It was about showing that even when misunderstood, the best way to respond isn't anger or pride. It's reason and respect. He had turned a moment of mockery into a lesson that no one in that courtroom would forget. And as he left the city that evening, his words from the hearing lingered in many minds. Innovation doesn't challenge the laws, it expands it. The final day of the trial arrived with an air of anticipation, unlike anything before. The courthouse was packed, reporters jostling for position, cameras flashing incessantly, and people whispering among themselves. Elon Musk arrived quietly, nodding politely to a few fans and staff, but his expression remained calm and focused. He didn't need applause or recognition. He simply wanted the truth to be understood. Inside, the judge entered shortly after, carrying the weight of all the evidence and testimonies that had been presented over the previous days. He had spent hours reviewing Elon's documents, going over every report, timeline, and independent audit. He knew the public had expectations, but he also knew the decision had to rest on facts, not media frenzy. Elon's legal team arranged their notes carefully, while the opposing counsel looked tense. They had tried every strategy: dramatic claims, complex arguments, and pointed questions. But Elon had handled them all with quiet clarity. The courtroom was ready for the final round, and even the atmosphere seemed to hum with expectation. The judge cleared his throat. "We are here to conclude this trial," he said. His voice was firm, yet free of the sarcasm that had marked the first day. "I have carefully reviewed all evidence, listened to all testimonies, and considered the arguments presented." The opposing lawyer started to protest, but the judge raised his hand. "No interruptions. This is the final statement of the court." All eyes turned to Elon as he stood slowly. He didn't need to gesture dramatically or raise his voice. His calm presence alone drew attention. "Your Honor," he began softly, "I want to thank the court for allowing me to explain the facts. I respect the law deeply, and I have always aimed to comply fully. I understand that sometimes innovation can seem confusing or even risky, but the intention was never to break rules or mislead anyone. My goal has always been to advance progress responsibly." The judge listened quietly, leaning forward slightly. Elon continued, "We've presented evidence, documents, and expert reports that show our actions were in full compliance. Any misunderstanding arose from differences in interpretation and timing, not from disregard for the law." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I am not here to argue about fame or power. I am here to clarify, so the truth can be understood. That is all I ask." A hushed silence filled the room. Even the opposing counsel looked taken aback, realizing that Elon's approach had consistently been calm, respectful, and logical. The judge leaned back and studied him, the expression on his face shifting subtly from cautious to contemplative. Finally, the judge spoke. "Mr. Musk, your explanation has been thorough, and your evidence is detailed. I must admit, when this case began, I expected arrogance and defiance. What I have seen instead is clarity, patience, and a respect for the law that is rarely demonstrated in this courtroom." A ripple of surprise went through the audience. The judge's words carried more than just acknowledgement. They carried respect. Elon nodded slightly, not with pride, but with quiet acknowledgement. The judge continued, "I have reviewed the documents presented today and those submitted throughout this trial. After careful consideration, it is clear that the allegations against Mr. Musk's company are based on misunderstandings and incomplete information. Therefore, the court finds that no violations of the law occurred." A gasp swept through the room. Some people cheered quietly while others shook their heads in disbelief. The opposing counsel looked stunned, muttering to himself, unable to grasp how the case had been overturned. Elon remained calm, standing silently as the judge added, "Let this serve as a reminder that clarity, preparation, and honesty hold power even in the face of doubt or criticism. This court acknowledges the efforts made by Mr. Musk and his team to provide full transparency and responsible oversight in their operations." The judge's acknowledgement was more than a legal ruling. It was a public statement of respect. Elon's calm, methodical approach had turned a courtroom filled with skepticism into a room of acknowledgement. As the ruling was read, the atmosphere changed. Reporters whispered among themselves, cameras clicked, and social media updates spread almost instantly. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted, some clapping, others cheering, while many simply stood in awe of the turn of events. People had witnessed something rare, a powerful man handling immense pressure with humility and logic, ultimately earning respect through reason rather than confrontation. Elon's lawyer leaned over and whispered, "You did it. You changed the whole tone of the trial." Elon gave a slight smile. It wasn't about winning, it was about understanding. Once the courtroom emptied, the judge remained seated for a moment, reflecting on the events of the past days. He had entered this case expecting a spectacle of arrogance and defiance. Instead, he had seen a man who valued facts over fame, clarity over emotion, and truth over ego. Even his own approach had shifted, from mockery to careful listening, from impatience to reflection. The experience had humbled him. He made a note in his personal file. Exceptional demonstration of logic and integrity. A reminder that even those we doubt can teach us lessons about respect and truth. Outside, Elon walked slowly to his car. Fans cheered, journalists asked questions, but he moved with the same calm demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial. He didn't need to shout, gesture, or make statements to show triumph. The proof was in the outcome and in the respect earned. Later that evening, as Elon returned to his office, he reviewed the documents one last time. It wasn't for the court or the public, then it was for himself. He reflected on how preparation, honesty, and clarity had turned a difficult, high-pressure situation into a moment of understanding and respect. The trial had been about the law, but it had also been about communication, patience, and the power of calm reasoning. His team celebrated quietly, but Elon remained contemplative. "It's never about defeating someone," he said softly. "It's about ensuring that the right information is heard and understood. That's what matters." In the days following the verdict, news outlets around the world shared the story. Headlines praised the ruling, highlighting how Elon had handled the courtroom with calm intelligence and respect. Analysts dissected his approach, noting how logic, preparation, and humility had turned what could have been a humiliating experience into a masterclass of poise and effectiveness. Social media buzzed with discussions, with many people saying they had learned more about patience and reason from watching the trial than from any speech or interview. Even in private discussions, other CEOs, innovators, and policymakers mentioned the case. Many saw it as a lesson in how clear thinking, preparation, and respect for process could shift perceptions and outcomes. Elon's example wasn't about being untouchable or unbeatable. It was about being prepared, honest, and consistent. In his office late that night, Elon looked out the window at the city lights. He thought about the judge, the opposing lawyers, and the many people who had watched and listened over the past days. He smiled faintly, not from pride, but from quiet satisfaction. The challenge had been met not with anger or force, but with clarity, patience, and understanding. The final lesson of the trial wasn't just about the law. It was about human behavior. It was about how assumptions and skepticism could be replaced with respect and comprehension when someone took the time to explain clearly, logically, and calmly. Elon had faced mockery and doubt and had turned it into an opportunity for truth to shine. Weeks later, the judge shared his reflections in a private interview. He didn't speak about the media attention or the fame. Instead, he spoke about the importance of listening carefully, acknowledging facts, and remaining open to perspectives that initially seemed improbable. "I entered that courtroom thinking I knew the outcome," he said quietly. "I was proven wrong, and it was humbling. Mr. Musk didn't try to impress me. He simply showed me the truth, and it was impossible to ignore." The story became more than just a legal victory. It became an example of how integrity, patience, and reason could overcome doubt and skepticism. It showed people that the most powerful response to criticism wasn't anger, defiance, or dramatic gestures. It was calmness, clarity, and a commitment to the truth. Elon's life returned to its usual pace, new projects, innovations, and challenges. But the trial left a mark, not on him personally, but on everyone who had watched it unfold. The public, the media, and even the legal professionals involved had witnessed a rare display of composure, logic, and integrity. The lesson was clear. Real influence comes not from fear, fame, or force, but from knowledge, preparation, and honesty. As for Elon, he remained humble about the entire experience. He didn't celebrate the headlines or the social media attention. Instead, he reflected quietly on what had worked and what had been learned. He knew that progress in life and in business was never easy. Misunderstandings, doubt, and skepticism were always part of the journey. But with patience, preparation, and a calm commitment to truth, even the toughest challenges could be faced and resolved. The courtroom that had once been filled with laughter and sarcasm now seemed like a distant memory. What remained was respect, earned not through dominance but through clarity, honesty, and integrity. And for everyone involved, it was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful victories are quiet, methodical, and deeply human. Elon.